that story of the Aztecs and the conquistadors coming over. There's a there's a view of that which says if you're looking at life and the universe as kind of a free market experience, that psychedelics, and I'm saying this full sensitivity to it, caused them to lose, if you will, right? They got wiped from the earth. Europeans came over and took over. They've become the predominant force. They got to write history the way they wanted. They got to eliminate psychedelics because it didn't jive with how they thought about it. Like, I think we have to entertain, like, and I'm not saying that's a good thing by any means, but in that free market survival of the fittest thing, what do we say to that? The idea that they were wiped out. Does it cause something where, I don't even know how to word it. It's not a weakness, obviously, but how do we reconcile? How do we explain the fact that people that were more in tune with that and subscribe to that didn't survive? Like, how do we make sense of that in the grand scheme of things?
Yeah, just because somebody's violent and aggressive, I don't know if that makes them quote unquote better or more evolved.
Yeah, totally.
So,
better is the wrong word.
Here's an example. Like, so say, because what happened was the Aztecs invited them into their society, the conquistadors. So imagine you invited some guests into your house to spend the night and took care of them, and then they just killed everybody in your family. We wouldn't be like, well, they're more evolved and better, right? It's
exactly.
Like,
but that's a beautiful
thing to do.
Yeah, let me jump, because I think that's a beautiful illustration of it, right? Like, in many ways, you and I, it sounds like we're somewhat similar in this, can look at that and be like, you monsters. Like, obviously, if I'm talking about who's better in that situation, it's pretty obvious who's better. But that's why I say, in that very cold, like, law of the jungle, which maybe some people think that's what the world is, that idea that they did invite them in is what caused their demise. So is there something evolutionarily that says that's actually a bad thing?
Totally. So, one of my favorite books I read was called The Empathic Civilization by Jeremy Rifkin. He's written about 20 books on economics, and advises, for example, Chinese, European governments. I think works at MIT. He's a great just social thinker and sociologist. And he really argues it's been the empathy that's really helped given humanity our edge. For example, it's our ability to coordinate and talk and empathize and work as groups that's really brought us forward and as a species to create civilizations and cities and large buildings and projects. It's our ability to work in unison, not as individuals. We wouldn't get very far as individuals if we were completely like reptiles or pretty much just fending for themselves. They didn't get very far. It's our ability to learn like this and do awesome fucking things, especially through language, that allows. So it's our connection that has been our strength. We are soft-bodied creatures. We don't have talons and claws. It's our ability to actually empathize. And so I think it was a major loss to humanity that we eradicated 2 continents of people. We lost cosmologies, wisdoms around plants, different ways of living. It was a major loss. So the survival of the fittest is just such a poor idea of not only our nature, but actually what's effective. If we work together as a world, we can accomplish much more and have a better life, as opposed to countries fighting against each other. Everybody loses resources. We're all limited. The lifespan is lower. It's a major loss. So the mentality, I think, really needs to shift and evolve. From this kind of dominating is better to like, actually, we can all fucking win and do much better together.
Yeah, no, I agree. And in many ways, it's the reason I asked the question, because I want to believe, and there's very good reason to believe that is true. And I think for us to get to that, we have to look at the ugly sides of it and try and look at it as objectively as possible and make sense of it. And even as you're saying that about the empathy bringing us together, my first thought is like, yes, that makes sense. Actually, that's how we were able to do all these amazing things. There's a cynical side of me, though, that steps in and says, well, slavery had a big part wherever in the world you want to go. Like, forced labor, abusing people to be able to build great things and achieve great things also comes into it. And I think that speaks to the kind of duality and the nuance of life, is that it's, I think both you and I would wish life could be simpler in some ways, and it was easy and you can learn, oh, this is what it is, but it's not. And in some ways that's what makes it beautiful. But there's that other part of it which says, like, again, that's what I find myself questioning most when I'm going through this show and the journey in general, is like, how much are we telling ourselves because it makes ourselves feel better, but it's really an illusion, versus what's the truth? And maybe that's a good example of it. Like, is it empathy? It's probably somewhat that, but it's also partially the ability for us to go just ravage and take resources and make slaves out of people that allows us to achieve great things. You can even think of, like, in the medical community, the willingness to abuse and test out experiments on people that we didn't think were human and weren't worthy of having like their own rights in life, allowed us to achieve and accomplish and invent great things. And that's what scares me, if I'm being honest, about humanity. I'm not sure which side we go with and wins out. And it's also what intrigues me about this conversation, which you're talking about, because it lays out a path of maybe we can figure it out in the right way and get to those same innovations and greatness without so much suffering that's caused. And it sounds like that's where you land. You land on the optimistic side of it, which is like, I'm very real to the fact that we've done a lot of ugly things, but there's a path for us to be better. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So it's hard to really see if slavery enabled us to do great things, because there's a
Fair,
200-year period that
fair,
could have been even fucking better,
fair.
and that I think people are paying for tremendously. I mean, and it depends who the we is. So I've identified with a very specific culture, so it helped Western European people make more economically.
Yes.
I don't think it
Yes.
allowed them to become better people, you know. And then, but what the cause was 5 generations of slavery that was torture and hell for a huge part of our humanity that is still kind of locked into some level of slavery, whether it's through the prison systems or the neighborhoods. And we caused tremendous terror in the process. If we cooperated, I think a lot more could have been done. So it depends. If we did great things, it means economically for a few, you know, or I mean, we could have built a fucking utopia if we wanted to.
Such a good
You
distinction.
know?
Such a good
Yeah.
distinction. And a time horizon is such an important one, right? Because maybe we do go extinct. Maybe we destroy this world for whatever reason, and we can look and be like, who won that? Like nobody won, whereas maybe that's avoided the other way, right?
That's a great example. So even though we're facing our ecological crisis that's ravaging, you know, fires here in the entire West Coast, it's it's only amazingly just worse, you know. So I hope I don't have to say just how bad the ecological crisis is. And it all came down to profit and financial gain. That some companies out there were making a lot for themselves and building their empire, ravaging resources, burning all the fuel, and they're gonna fucking die too. You know? So major fucking loss. If we don't work together, we all fucking perish. It's one planet.
So how do you, so we went like, and I know you were just giving an example, but like the Aztecs and the Europeans coming over, what's at the root? Like if you try and get to the first principle, why did humans, maybe it's Europeans, maybe it goes beyond that, how did we ever get off track? Like why did we ever lose sight of it? Why did greed ever become such a big driver for us versus what it seems like it should have been, right? Like what allowed that to happen?